Today's topic is A, History of West Northfield, and I emphasize the A because it's not the history yet. Hopefully, maybe one of you will take on that task. Not an expert, but I want to thank Betty for suggesting that we do this program, because we have lots of programs about East Northfield or different other parts of Northfield, and so the question came up, what about West Northfield? So that caused me to take a look at West Northfield. I also want to thank my intrepid photographer, Joanna, who went on this journey with me. So it's a little bit of a geographical tour as well as a little bit of history. There's a lot to cover, so if you could save your questions and comments so afterwards we could get through it without keeping you here all day. First of all, we might want to see where is West Northfield, and this is it. We're over here on the right side, and there's West Northfield across the river. And you can see what is how West Northfield is set up today, how much of it is forest and so forth in relation to Bernardston and Vermont. This is not always what West Northfield was. It went further north in the very early days all the way up to the Vernon Dam, and it went further south into what is now Hoel. And this is just looking at it from above a Google map. So another question that we might have is why West Northfield? I mean, why did we get West Northfield? How do we have this piece of land across the river when you may know that it's the only town with a land on both sides of the river? Well, it started out in a similar way that Hadley did. Hadley was on both sides of the river, and then we have Hatfield is what happened to their West Northfield in a sense. And in Northfield, we always kept it. West Northfield is as old as the entire town of Northfield. It was in the first grants. So it was recognized for what you see here is the agricultural possibilities, as was much of the valley below us, which is where everyone came from. The name for this particular meadow, which stretches along the Connecticut Bennett Meadow, was taken from James Bennett, who was born in 1651. I don't know much about James Bennett. He was an explorer from Boston, and he came to Northfield in the first settlement, which was 1673. And then he was a victim of the Falls fight in Turners Falls in 1676. So the meadow was named after him, and then the brook that runs through it also. Here's just a couple of more photos of the meadow, what it's being used for now, and to one degree or another what it's always been used for agriculture. There's a wetland. There's corn, one of our crops, and it's now under management by the Mass Division of Fisheries and Wildlife. Nearby, a little north, we have King Philip's Hill. King Philip was, as you probably know, the son of Massasoit, and was from the east, the Wampanoag tribe, and he spent a couple of different visits to Northfield, and one was when he was trying to get help from the Western Indians in New York State. He came and camped in Northfield, and I believe he left his camp there and went further into New York, and I think failed to get help from New York. But this is where he stayed. This is a rendering of him. And this is a shot of the hill from the back. And it's worth a visit to go up there and get a view. This is another part of what was West Northfield, Grass Hill. It is a part that was, as far as I know, there wasn't a lot of settlement in West Northfield in the first two settlements, but it was farmed. It raises a question that I don't have an answer to, but how did we get back and forth across the river to go do the farming? Was it little canoes? I wouldn't think the ferries were set up yet in the first two settlements. But there were definitely people living right after the third settlement, which was 1714. And into the early 1720s, there were quite a number of families here. Fields, Parmenters, Carters, Munns, and Severance, and so forth. And what happened to this part of Northfield was that in 1793, Gill was established as a town from Deerfield. And within 2 years, this part of Northfield said, we want to be a part of Gill, and was so annexed. And it was, looks like this today. It's the Mount Hermon campus. That's what Grass Hill is today. This is one of our landmarks. It's the Mount Hermon Cemetery, which was established about 1817 by Lemuel Holton. The Holtons were very early into this part of Northfield, as they were in every part of Northfield. One of the biggest families that we have. And this was used by locals. Here's Cyrus Holton and Amanda Brown, his wife. For those of you who are related to me, Amanda Brown is a cousin. Just so I don't have to tell you later. And there's about 250 stones here, used by, as I say, the locals, as well as Mount Hermon people would sometimes decide that they wanted to be there. This is Cyrus Holton's house that we just saw his gravestone. I don't know if you recognize it. It's still standing. It actually, when I was a kid, it looked more like this than it does today. Now, the caption says, early home of D.L. Moody. Well, I have to take issue with that. I don't know that he ever lived there. So you can't believe everything that you see, read. But his mother lived there. His mother was Betsy Holton. And she was born there. And she was a sister to Cyrus. This is the house today. Very important house. It's called the Holton Homestead. And many generations of Holtons lived there. And they were very important, particularly out of this house. As I say, the Holtons were all over Northfield, but this is one of the major homes for and so this is now on Old Bernardston Road. There's some question as to when they came here and when they built this house, how old this house is, so that's another question that I want to try to get answered. I think it's in the early 1800s, back to the Revolution, even as early as 1760s, but the Holton family always thought that it was much older, and it could be part of it was, and that they were certainly there much earlier. It was Henry's Holton, who was the son of Sarah's Holton, who was also an important person in Northfield. In fact, he was the one that welcomed Teddy Roosevelt to town when Teddy Roosevelt visited Northfield, and there's other stories about that, how Henry didn't have any sons to carry on the house, and his wife was pregnant, and he hoped it was a boy, and so Teddy Roosevelt left town. His wife had a child and named him Teddy Roosevelt Holton, and let the president know, and the president responded with, "That's great." And so a couple more generations of Holtons were here until such time as it went from Holton to Bolton. Just to confuse the issue. And it was, first name was Bolton.
Horace.
Horace, thank you, Horace Bolton. And Horace Bolton had, quite the big farm that was here, and it soon became, part of it became our high school. So right behind that house is where the high school is today. And there's a more recent picture of it, and that was 1957 that our high school opened. Okay, so we go a little further out beyond the high school onto Mount Herman Station Road, and we come to Sawyer Pond, what I call Sawyer Pond. Okay. I'm sure it's had a lot of names over the years. And just this side of it, this is on the left-hand side of the road as we're going north. On the right-hand side is a dam where, for the mill that was here. And there was a mill. This was set up as a mill pond, and there was a mill here for many years. I think they saw the reason for putting one there and gave rights on the Bennett Brook back in the 1600s even. And it was a sawmill, it was a grist mill, and up until I think the 1940s it was perhaps still being used for milling whatever people wanted to have milled. And you might run even a cider mill there.
I think it got washed out in the hurricane.
In the hurricane in 38, okay.
So I don't think it was still going.
Okay. So this was Benjamin Sawyer came to Northfield in 1817. And himself had a saw and grist mill on the Natanis was the name of the brook, actually, when the Indians went by. And I forgot to mention that what Indians were here. And this is another question I would like more information about. But apparently in West Northfield, you have this overlap of Squaw Peaks, which is what the rest of the villages in Northfield were made up of, which are Western Abenakis, but also in West Northfield, I understand there were Pecumtucks, which is a whole different tribe, and they stretched down mostly into Deerfield. But I understand they were both there. And Natanis was the name of the brook. So Benjamin was here for many years, about 50 years, and his brother, his son sold it to the Pickett brothers, and then Cola Nelson. There's more than one Cola Nelson, in case you happen to know one. There's one living today, in fact, but it was a different, related but a different one. And Cola Nelson was here for many years, ran this mill until I think he sold it in 1890, or thereabouts. And so you have also, to the right of this, you can see the road there. When I was a kid, that we called that House Kitchen Road, but it had also been called Nelson Road, as this has been called Nelson's Pond, and it's a very nice drive out there into other ponds and wetlands that we should take a look at sometime. Satan's Kingdom Wildlife Management Area, another Mass Fisheries and Wildlife Managed area. You probably want to know why it's called Satan's Kingdom. That's another question we don't have an absolute answer to. But Channel 5 came out, and I don't know if you saw that program, but they wanted to know. And they interviewed a whole bunch of us. And I think there's really two stories, or there's two reasons how Satan's Kingdom got its name. First is the written history that I've seen says that one Sunday morning when people came out of church over here on this side, they looked over and saw West Northfield was afire that was in flames. They saw this big fire across the river, and so the minister said, "Wow, look, Satan's Kingdom is burning up." And that is supposedly how it got its name. But why would he call it Satan's Kingdom? So the other thought is that often in towns, a part of town would get a nickname based on who was living there, according to some other people. So, for example, up in Vermont, I have some relatives that lived in Happy Hollow, and I found that they lived in Happy Hollow because they were feuding all the time in Happy Hollow, and in fact, we have a Happy Hollow in Northfield. I don't recall who was living there but so there was the thought that this was an aspersion being passed by the minister or by people that, people that lived over there were heathens or something. So you can go hunting, fishing, and trapping and hiking through there, just to let you know. As we come further up 142 or Mount Hermon Station Road, we come to Northfield Wash, Sand, and Gravel. There's an old picture that I think Leslie Gibson for. This was started by Fred Kelly. So I always remember it as Kelly's Sandbank is what we called it. He was a trucker in Greenfield, and then he realized the need for trucking sand for roads, because in the 1930s, when he started this, 1937, a lot of roads were being built in Northfield, in Massachusetts, everywhere, and asphalt was being used to pave the roads. And I think that is about when some of our roads were paved, right at that time, too. Fred Kelly died in 1959, and I believe it was a nephew of his who continued it for a while. And Fred Kelly lived over here, though. He lived just north of the road that goes down to Shell Bridge. And his granddaughter just sold that house last year. There's another shot. So this gives you a lot of the people who got jobs there. So it was a good employment place. Randall's, Gibson's, French, James, one of the oldest names in Northfield, and other local people. And this is what it looks like today. I'm not sure now what year Lane bought this. I think it was in the late 80s, maybe. Earlier? Yeah, I wasn't able to quite figure that out because of the names and the deeds and the companies and the shell companies. So, there we are, kind of on the moon. So as we travel further down or up 142, we come to this house. I was happy to find this picture because it's a little bit of a mystery to me, this house. There's a sign out there that says, or fairly recently said, the 1790 house. I don't know if that was when it was built. It very well could be. It looks like that era. The Preston family came to Northfield in 1798. And some of the children I know were in West Northfield. And the PW stands for Pitts. His first name was Pitts. He was a later Preston. And the interesting thing about the Prestons is I believe it was Charles Preston who, there's a great big huge plaque in the town hall, who went to Russia during the early days, and under the guise of he was in the shoe business or something, but he was actually securing platinum for us, so he was kind of a big hero.
Where is this house located?
This is, if you go along Bethlehem Station Road after Caldwell Road, and then you go down the hill, it's right there on the right. And this is how it looks today. Yeah. So when I was a kid, it was Milford Atwood lived here, and he was an interesting person. Before him, I think it was John Wozniak lived here, if you know that family. And then here we have the old Yankee farm, which is what Bill and Joyce Roberts called their farm here. And they were there from 1962 to 2003. So they were there for a very long time. It was always Holton's before, another Holton family. And it was, let's see, Carlton, Clifford, Roswell, Horace were the Holtons that were there. And so now we have a lot of dairy farming. Back in the day, different crops would come and go, but in this area, what was particularly popular was hops. It was a big crop in West North, especially from this area north. It seemed to be hops. A little further along is the West Northfield School. And this was one of the district schools. We had tons of them in Northfield. I mean, we had probably 13 different little schoolhouses. This is one of the larger ones. And the later ones were larger. So you have this one, the one on Pine Street, and the one in Northfield Farms, were the two-story schools that were built in the later 1800s. But we did have up to 15 little schoolhouses in Northfield, and this was just number 7 of them. Here is students and a list of their names, and Doolittles and Prestons and Reeds and so forth. And this was a little bit later than that picture, I think early 1900s. Okay. And this this one is a little bit more recent. You might recognize 1 or 2 people. I don't know if we got Florence Brassor correct. We need to find that one out. We have a Barnes who looks like a Barnes to me. And there's Lucille Bolton and Brad Gibson. I don't know Lori Harris. Class of 34. And there was the teacher, Miss Reyes. I was not alive when she was here, but I sure heard about her. We can talk about her later. So here's how it looks today. If you go down behind, I don't know when it became the VFW. So it became the VFW in recent years. I'm not sure what year. I would like to know that. If you go behind, you can see the schoolhouse down at the end of the picture. We get to another West Northfield Cemetery, which is a very important cemetery. It was a little earlier than the Mount Herman Cemetery. 1808 is what I figure here. There's about over 750 people here, and they're from all over Northfield. And why? Why not just West Northfield? Well, a couple of reasons. If you were from West Northfield but you moved away, you might still be buried there. And that's why the Parkers are there, because they were married to the Caldwells, and the Caldwells were from West Northfield. And so you go, and then the other reason is because the Northfield Center Cemetery got full. So that's another reason why we have people here. And as another side note to my cousins, we have a lot of ancestors in there. Holton's everywhere. Just liked the colors there. And right nearby is a potato field. So it's kind of interesting to me to think in terms of the agriculture throughout and what is being grown when, and today potatoes are grown here. Okay, this is, I just pulled out a few houses. We couldn't look at all of them, but this was interesting to me because I had a picture of it that a descendant of George Reed sent to me. So it was very exciting, and he knew all about it. It's a little blurry, but this is where the Reeds started. If you know the Reed family, there were actually quite a few Reeds. George Reed himself, the first one, actually left. There he is with his wife Abby. He left Abby and went west, and she carried on, and the family continued. They ran the lumber mill on Mill Street, or Glen Road. They started the gas station that became the Gulf Station. That's now the barbecue. The Reed family did. And they were builders in Greenfield, and they built a couple of houses in Northfield, in fact, too. I think this one right next door, in fact, I believe they built the Reed family. And this is what it looks like today. So it is still there. I was happy to see. Then continuing on down the road, we come to the West Northfield Playground, which is a place where many of us might have, oh, here I am. This was, the history of this is interesting. You know, it's recent, but it's still, I'm so glad that somebody made some notes on this. In 1948, and I'd like to know who wrote this too, but in 1948, there was a baseball team in West Northfield that Chick Karen started. Chick Karen lived in West Northfield, and they called themselves the West Northfield Blue Jays. And they rented this field from Mrs. Parmiter every summer. And she offered to sell it to them for $600 after a couple of years if they would, you know, use it in this way and open it up to everyone. And so they did. In 1951, they purchased it and sold memberships for $1. And they organized. The first president was who? Fred Bolton. Yes. And 1960, there were a lot of changes here, and it was expanded. And the wash, sand, and gravel place contributed about 300 tons of fill. And S.E. Johnson donated 25 tons of loam. Arthur Stacy did the bulldozing. Ed Fortier built a sandbox. And fireplaces were added, and a driveway and a shuffleboard. So this has had many presidents over the years. You might know some of them besides Fred Bolton, Chick Karen, John Green, Gardner Hudson, Richard Bassett, Mike Gibson, Ed Fortier, Verna Gibson, Ivan Smith, Robert Gibson, Chad Glover, Bob Wood, Jared Gibson. Is he current?
He is current.
He is current. Okay. And so lots of reunions, and it's a nice rentable space that you can use. Right down the hill was a blacksmith shop. It's obviously not there now. Douglas Walter Parker came from Quebec and to ply his trade. You can see carriages and so forth there, and he was there in the early 1900s, just as cars were coming in. After him was Henry Martineau. Henry Martineau was a blacksmith from Northfield Farms, and he was there for years and years and years. And then in that space, it looks like this now, was, I couldn't find a picture of Barnes's store and garage. And that's what it looks like today. The Barneses were there for, I think 50 years or so. A couple generations. And this was when it went by the wave. Continuing on, we come to the Belding House, which is one of the couple of Stearns houses that were built in West Northfield. Elijah Belding, the Belding family went back to 1717. They were induced to come to Northfield and build a mill on Mill Brook on this side of the river. And some of the family ended up over here, and Elijah Belding became a huge farmer, and he was a big cattleman, and for many years also he was very big in the hops. growing hops. It was a big activity. So he had lots of money, and he could get this house built. Different views of it. These I found in the Library of Congress. The old fireplace. So really nice pictures. After the Beldings, they lived there for many years. One of the sons went to Springfield and got into shoes, and so made lots of money in the shoe business in Springfield. And he came back and retired there, so it stayed in the family for a long time. When I was a kid, it was the Ponics. You might remember the Ponics. And then later Chad Glover lived there. Lizzie Barber is it's a program in herself. She wrote this diary, which you can't tell from the picture, but the diary is about this big. And so transcribing it, it took 5 of us combing through it to blow it up and try to read it. But it's a tremendous diary, and I wish we could go into it more. But it gives us a picture of 1860. Lizzie was 18 years old. She lived in, I don't know which house because they kept moving around, but in that neighborhood. And she told us all about what she was doing and how she would go across the river to Northfield to go singing, which was a chore, but she went to the train station all the time. That was the big excitement, to go to the train station to see who was there, who was coming in, who was going out. She talks about all the gentlemen callers that come to the house, and that happened a lot. It was amazing, and she just kind of went with the flow and didn't seem to choose anyone, and she ended up marrying somebody from Guilford and moving there, but she had no children, and we found this diary in Oregon. So we got into a little bidding war on eBay, but we got it, so it was very exciting. But she also talks about the hops, and so everybody would, at certain times of year, they would all go over to the Beldings or to the Dickinsons or whomever to harvest the hops. So you go a little further. This is just as you're entering into the village. It's dating myself, but it's more how I remember it. Except for the road. The road's paved, but you can see you're coming into the village of South Vernon, Mass. Or you can call it West Northfield, Vermont. And this was what it was. And it was very active. There were stores all along here, particularly this one on this end was Bufham's store. Edward B. Buffum, and he was a farmer and a winter school teacher, and then he got into keeping store up in Wilmington, Vermont. He came here to Northfield in 1902 and took over this store. It was a general store. He also ran the post office, so he was the postmaster for West Northfield, where South Vernon was the postmark I remember, South Vernon, Mass.
Joel, where is this in relation to Barnes? I can't figure out where
we're going north. We're still going north.
So past like Advent Christian Church?
No.
Right before it.
Right
before it.
Just before the state
Okay.
line.
Right
The other
before
side
it.
of the road.
Okay.
Just before it. Right on the state line.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that building's not there anymore. The store building is not there anymore.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I can't figure
So
out
is
where
this
I am.
building on the east side of the road at the fork?
On the right side.
It's
Just
just past
right
Yeah, it's on the east side.
It's on the
Yeah.
east side,
Yeah, Joe, you can see the Shippa
Just
house
past
right
the
there.
Shipper's house.
Just
Bob
past,
Shipper.
It's the
just
Shipper
past
house.
Shipper's house.
Okay.
And one of those buildings, I remember as a kid, there was a pet shop too.
Yes,
So
it was.
So,
Yeah,
Joe, I'm less familiar with that. Are we looking north or south?
we're looking south.
Got it. Thank you.
We're looking south. This is the east side of the road. Yeah. So also he delivered. Then around the corner. Well, I should say while we're there at at Buffin's that he was described as a merchant of the old school, solicitous and anxious to please his customers, a perfect gentleman. He did pretty well there. He after about 15 years or so, he bought property in East Northfield and a house and a store. And who's there now in the store?
Wavelengths.
Wavelengths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was Clarence Buffum, I think was his name.
And there was a gas pump there.
Yes,
too.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he had different things. There was even a restaurant and so on in that store. But that's taking us to East Northfield. But that's just the connection there with Buffum's. And then E.C. Brown. This is around the corner. So if you're still going north and you go past where that store was and you go to the right. And so I think this was the grocery store. Before, like Barnes's went into groceries, I think at some point. And I found two different pictures with two different people here. And so we're probably, I'm not positive, we may be in Vermont now, actually, but it's part of the village that was, no snow boundaries, I guess. And just to acclimate you a little, this is right across from that store, and this was the Vernon home of a retirement community that looks like this today. And across the road is the church. And lots of people from Northfield go or went to this church too, and it's very close to us. And it was part of Northfield at one time.
It used to be called South Vernon, Massachusetts.
Right, yep. So now we're coming back to the train station. I don't know if you know where that was, but we're coming back, by Belding's house there and taking that left, and you'll run into the bridge and the railroad tracks. And so this railroad station there was a station here for probably 50 years, or 60 years before this, but this was a new station that was built in 1909. And this is, you can see it in construction there. And then notice the abutments at the right end, and that's where that bridge was put in the following year by the American Bridge Company. And we'll come back to them. And that's how it looks today. There's no station there. And that's just looking north. The Amtrak comes through there.
Turtle,
So this is not too far away from where the train station was. And this is where New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Vermont meet. And this is usually underwater. But these guys went and dug it up
when they were cleaning the river.
They were,
When they were cleaning
They
the river,
drained.
so the water was down.
okay.
Yeah, they
And
drained
the,
it.
the definition of the border between Vermont and New Hampshire is low water on the Vermont side,
Yeah,
which makes for interstate planning really difficult. Folks in New Hampshire had to do all the work and then present the plan to Vermont, who could either say yes or no after all they did the work. It's really
and
kind of confusing.
this corner is on the West Northfield or Vermont side, so Vermont doesn't own the river, I guess you'd say, at this point. And then, since you can't see this very often, there's something else you can see nearby. In fact, we had a parade to go visit this site and during the Tricentenary. I'm not going to tell you where it is because it's on private property, but I did go there. This is a witness stone, so it's a witness to the mud turtle, and it talks about, it's got all the governor's names and so forth there, and that was installed in 1897. Also, you've got, you can find those if you're clever. If you want to know where Vermont and Massachusetts meet, little monuments. Okay, so coming back down what is now West Northfield Road, that used to be East Northfield Road, there's this lovely barn. We just like the barn. Now, maybe somebody can tell us. We think this was Earl Wild's barn, and that it went with the place across the road. Did this barn go with where was the?
The Boltons had it. They went with that house beyond, just beyond, diagonally across. There
Okay,
was a house, and that's when, after the flood, the Boltons moved up there.
that's what
And that was their barn.
That's what we thought, and here's when it's thought that it was built, 1859. A lovely barn. Yes, Arthur Bolton was there in the 30s, 40s,
It was
50s.
after the flood.
Yes,
Second flood.
yeah. Okay, so we're still going down that road, and we come to just this little house here, which was another schoolhouse. Some part of this house may have been the schoolhouse, I'm not sure. If not, that's where it was, one of the schoolhouses. There were 3 that I know of. We've now been to 2. The third one was somewhere around where Fort Refuse is, or was. On the corner of Bennett Brook Road and Old Bernardston Road was the third schoolhouse. Another lovely meadow. This was, went through lots of different names. I believe Purples were here. You might have heard the Purple name from Bernardston, Purple Meadow. In the 1920s, Andrew Plotzik came here. Andrew Plotzik was a weaver in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and decided to go into farming, and came here and was here for 50 years, I think. And it was his son Valentine Plotzik who started a 5-acre farm with his wife Esther Sestawicki. Yes. And that was in 1959, the 5-acre farm. Let's see, there's a closer up shot. And then if you took a left around this house was the way you go to Shellbridge. Okay. This was just kind of historic.
What?
An elm tree. And it's not Main Street, Northfield. So we thought that was quite stately. Okay, if you go straight and don't take that left, you come to Caldwell Road, And this house called Point Lookout Farm was there. That was the other Stearns house in Northfield. And that was owned by the Dickinsons. The Dickinsons were another big family in Northfield, and they stretched up into Vermont as well. That house burned down in the 1980s, I think.
Roger Bassett.
Yes,
Yes.
right, when Roger was there. Yep. That's a later shot of it. But the pillars are a giveaway for Stearns built house. Now, he didn't live here or come from here, but there's another Dickinson that lived in West Northfield. He was related to the Beldings, and like the Beldings, or some of them, he also left West Northfield and went east to Fitchburg and became a big shoe person and made lots of money in the shoe business. And he's the one who gave us this library that we're in. His house was on Mount Herman Station Road, somewhere around 572, but it burned down in the 20s, so we don't have his homestead. Continuing further, we come to an old version of an existing bridge. You see the train on top there. Below it is where the human traffic would go with the horses. I think the 1850s anyway, that this was built, a two-tier bridge, and it's on the site of a ferry. There was at least early-ish 1700s was Prindle's Ferry, and this was how you got to Northfield and back, was Prindle's Ferry. And so if you went from there and you're coming into Northfield, where you would end up coming out is somewhere around where Pentecost Road is now. That was the way you would go to West Northfield. And this is a very close point from bank to bank, so it makes sense that they would put the ferry there as well as the bridge. And then this bridge was condemned about 1900. So then the town couldn't decide whether to do another double-decker bridge or not. So they decided against it and just put in the railroad bridge. And this is another American Bridge Company bridge that was put in 1904, so that the trains could keep running. In the flood of '36, this bridge was pretty hard hit, and 3 of the spans were just completely taken out, and it was all rebuilt within a couple of years. Cement was added to level it, to make the deck level there. Just another view of it. More fields. There's lots of fields out here. Corn now. Earlier they did grow wheat and rye here, and probably at various points tobacco. And it's quite an expanse out through here. And this was all Caldwell's Caldwells were a Scottish-American family that came to Northfield in the 1700s, and there were quite a few, and there are descendants today, not with a name, but, and that's why you have Caldwell Road, because they had all these farms that later was Wiki, was one of the main farms there. And this is what it looks like today, so another crop, turf. I didn't even know that until I went on this tour. And then across the road is strawberries. So we're still coming up Caldwell Road. We have this lovely railroad arch, really nice architecture. And then this is just something that you don't see very often, where they clean the tracks. They clean the woods around the tracks. I don't know when they last did this, but they were doing this recently while we were out photographing, so we had to get a shot. It was historic. Then we come to our transfer station, which we all use. I don't know exactly the date on this. Another question I have, 1980s, I believe the transfer station came in to replace Fort Refuse.
I believe that was 88,
88.
only because it had just opened when we moved in.
Ah,
And I remember driving up, our first experience with the Northfield transfer station, driving up to put our trash in the trash truck, because none of the rest of it existed yet. I thought, that was an interesting twist on life. Driving to a trash truck.
great. Great to know that. Mount Herman Station, we have lots of railroad stations. There were two in West Northfield. We've been to one, and this is another one. And it was hard to try to place this. They call it the old open bucket. And if you were going to Mount Herman, the students, I guess, would get off at this stop and go over to probably walk over to Mount Herman. The road is seems to be changed, or either that or this part here is not really the main road. The main road goes through there. As you can see there, that's what it looks like today. But the station is gone. The building is gone. Just quickly to get other transportation. Once that bridge was condemned that we looked at, and they changed it to a railroad bridge at the same time. Mr. Shell, famous for the chateau, gave us money to build this bridge. And that was built and completed in 1903. So a lot of bridge building, the train bridge, the Shell Bridge, and then the former Bennett Meadow Bridge was 1899, that was completed, and that was the end of the old ferry that was there. That was our main ferry. At various points it was called Stebbins Ferry, and you can see the ferry house, which is still there. So that was all through the 1800s anyway, was Stebbins. And I was told that I could only talk for an hour, so that's an easy problem.